Welcome to our second KCATO Winter short of the year. This one will be about starting off strongly with your PPIE members, and I'm going to hand over to Sarah and Tani in a sec. They're going to be speaking about this and giving you a half-hour introduction to this topic. And then at the end, I'll be taking some questions. So do feel free to post any questions in the chat as we're going along. There'll also be the chance to raise your hand and come on mic at the end if you feel more comfortable doing that. And the three of us will be around for about 15 minutes afterwards as well. So until about 1:45, if anyone has any more questions and they want to carry on the discussion. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Sarah and Tani to introduce themselves and start the session.
Perfect. Thank you, Laura. So I'm just going to start off with an introduction, and then I'll let Tani introduce herself as well. I'm Sarah, and I'm the Public Involvement Coordinator across a couple of different areas in the university. First of all, with the Centre for Translational Medicine, and this covers all of our healthcare faculties and our NHS partners. And I also work across nursing, midwifery, and palliative care, in particular kind of based at the palliative care team, again, doing public involvement. I'm going to pass over to Tani.
Thank you. So I'm Tani. I'm a PhD part-time student. I'm in my 5th year, so I'm at the end of it. And I'm also a senior research clinical nurse specialist at Crabtree Hospital. So I won the KCATO PPIE award for this year for involving patients in my study. So that's why I'm involved in this winter warmer. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Tani. So I think hopefully as it's named winter warmer, you have a nice warm something in front of you that can keep you warm, especially in this really cold weather that we're having in England right now. But the plan for the next kind of half an hour is going to be to look at some of the differences between PPI activities, the kind of grey lines that exist between PPI and research, as well as the kind of PPI and co-production, what is PPI, what isn't PPI, that sort of thing. And we're going to hear some examples as well from Tani as to how she's used PPI members and kind of involved them in the PhD work that she's doing as well. So this is very much going to be a kind of starting point on PPI, and as Laura said, very happy to kind of answer questions and potentially also have further chats with some of you after this session as well. So first of all, I think, well, hopefully this is something that many of you know, the definition of PPIE from NIHR, which is that patients and public involvement members are kind of involved as a kind of with or by members of the public, that research is carried out with or by them rather than to, about, or for them. And they're kind of very much becoming part of the research team. So not necessarily advisory or kind of consulting, but part of the team working with them. And I think just to start off with, if you are able to use the chat, it would be interesting to hear from you as to what examples you might have of what is PPI and what examples you might have that isn't PPI. So just to kind of start off while you start writing in the chat, an example of what is PPI might be something like involvement of an advisory group in a research project. Giving you the answers there. An example of what might not be PPI, for example, might be that you, as you get your coffee in the morning, you mention to the local barista or the person next to you in the line about, you talk to them about the research that you're doing. So hopefully we will get some responses and some thoughts on what might be considered PPI versus something that wouldn't be considered PPI. So we have, co-developing an interview guide for a qualitative study, but participating in an interview is not. Absolutely. So you're seeing the kind of distinctions there between the research and public involvement as well, which can definitely be a grey line, and we'll cover that a little bit more. Are there a couple of other examples before I go ahead? If not, maybe we'll just keep going. Yeah, so survey isn't examples may yeah, so thinking about things like a survey or a interview questions, for example, the PPI aspect of it might be that the public members and the patients develop that survey or they develop the interview questions with you. But when it comes to actually sending out a survey, you can do a research project or a survey on public perspectives, but it's a little bit more about the research side rather than patients and public members developing that survey with you. And it's that developing the survey with you as researchers that becomes that public involvement aspect. Designing a co-design workshop for a new medical device is PPI, but participating in the workshop is part. Yeah, so again, this is like some of the, you guys are touching upon a lot of the gray areas that we often see in PPI. So we'll come to this in a little bit more detail. But it's really good that this is also what you're thinking about as well. So as some examples of what is PPI, kind of in some ways person-centered care as well. So especially for clinicians, if you are working with patients on a day-to-day basis, this can actually be considered public involvement. Obviously, you want to ensure that your professional relationship is kept as a professional relationship and that you're not kind of persuading people in certain ways because you are their care staff, part of their kind of care team. But it's very, very possible that you could go to some of your patients and say, like, you know, how are you doing this week? How have your symptoms been? How are you feeling? And in that process, you could also say, maybe while you're putting a drip up or whatever you might be doing, writing some notes, you could also say, oh, you know, over my week, I've been working on this project. I'm hoping it will be relevant to someone like you and it will be able to improve the way that we provide care. And what do you think? Do you think it would improve your care? Do you like the idea? Do you not like the idea? And it could be a kind of 2-minute conversation that you have with some of your patients. Understanding the patient perspective as well. Again, the more that you ask your patients how they're feeling, how they're doing, you're going to get that feedback from them, which you'll be able to feed into your project. And also discussions with colleagues. This is also something that people don't think about. But if you're thinking about how you might want to be creating a new way of, or kind of a new treatment plan, or how you might be caring for different patients, it's also important to talk to colleagues to know what's the best way of actually implementing that and what works for the care staff as well. Because if the care staff don't like the idea, it's going to be very, very difficult to actually get into the healthcare system. In terms of what is not PPI, chat with your barista about work. Involving patients or public members that don't have the appropriate experience. Again, if they don't have the appropriate experience, then where is that feedback actually going to? What's the importance of their feedback and how does that fit in? Someone who will just agree with your ideas as well. We had in the chat here involving people as research participants. So there's quite a big difference between research participants versus PPI. And then kind of using people to test certain treatments or because that kind of linking into that research participant idea. So from that, I'm going to pass over to Tani to give a couple of examples about how she's worked with patients. And kind of some of the examples that might also clarify some of those gray lines.
Thank you. So some of the things that I involved with my PPI has already been mentioned, but just to give you a bit of background about my project is I work in scleroderma, which is a rare connective tissue disease. They have a lot of comorbidities, and one of them are distal ulcers. Distal ulcers are ulcers that develop on the fingers and toes of this cohort of patients. So I developed the first Nestlé distal ulcer clinic in the country in 2012, and I ran it for 2 years, but somebody else took over. So when I wanted to do my PhD, I thought about like what can I do, as in what kind of research can I do? So I went and spoke to patients who suffer from digital ulcers, just to discuss, like, if we're going to do a study, what would they like? How would they like the study to be like, to be involved in, or how they wanted it to look like. So they said they wanted something to do with managing their digital ulcers at home, because not all patients get to come to a specialist hospital, and also some patients just remain like in secondary care. If they have complications with digital ulcers, they might be referred. And at that time, there were a few, we only have one drug that is approved for digital ulcers. And at that time, only the specialist tertiary centers could get hold of that. So, so patients suffered quite a lot. So that means they didn't have the same care that that was offered at tertiary hospital. So when they said something to do with self-management, I was like, okay, but how should we do it? And they said they wanted to be involved in the study. Next slide, please. So when I started thinking about, okay, they want to be involved, what type of research, I thought of applying to the NIHR. So I did two failed NIHR applications, unfortunately. So that meant I met my patient partners like 2 years before I actually started the PhD, because during those 2 years is the time that I was building the study and hoping to apply for the NIHR fellowship. So I approached 4 patients with a history of digital ulcers, and just here is just a clip of one of the letters that one of them wrote to me. I'll just quickly read it to you. Appropriate treatment for these types of ulcers feels like a hit and miss. Situation for many patients. For many patients, the ulcers are very debilitating and extremely painful. And because not all patients have access to a specialist health professional, patients are left feeling demoralized, helpless, with reduced quality of life, and worse, if their ulcers are not managed effectively, they have the potential to become severe with a less favorable outcome. The design of the study looks to effectively assess the current situation of self-management across patients and non-specialist health professionals to improve knowledge levels and produce materials to support both groups. This will lead to better care and improved digital ulcer outcomes, and is the reason why I am very happy to be invited to take up one of the roles as a patient research partner. Thank you again for including me on this study, and I very much look forward to sharing my knowledge and the anticipated positive outcome the study will provide. But unfortunately, this patient, her disease progressed, as in the scleroderma, and she passed away before she could become a research partner. So I was left with 3. Those 3, I've been with them since from the beginning. And I was meeting them at the beginning. I was meeting them every 3 months, and then later on, once the study started going on, I would meet them every 6 months, and I'm still in contact with all of them. Next slide, please. So examples of how they contributed in my study. they read and advised and corrected the patient information information sheets when I was when I was writing the information sheets and consent forms. So they read and corrected it. They also advise on the patient outcomes in the systematic review. Once I had written the systematic review and I was analyzing it, there were a lot of outcomes, and I couldn't tell like which ones are really important for the patients. So I consulted with my PPI, and they helped with that. And I had a problem which I had not anticipated before in experience-based core design, which is the type of core design study that I did. There is an element of filmed interviews. So it's a point that was picked up by the HRA when I had the HRA interviews, that if patients refuse to be filmed, what are you going to do? So I was like, oh no, my patients are all pro research. I'm not going to face anything like that. But I had to input in my application that if patients refuse to be filmed, then they will then I'll audio record them only. And lo and behold, when I started asking patients to recruit patients into the study for the filmed interviews, I had a problem. I was quite naive. I hadn't thought it through because they have self-image issues, because scleroderma alters the face image of an individual. So it changes how they look, and a lot of them have insecurities about how they look. So they were declining to be recruited for the filmed interviews. So I went back to the PPI and I was asking for suggestions of how I could recruit more patients, and they helped with that. At the end, I managed to get the 15 patients that I needed. They didn't know about experience-based core design, just as I didn't know about it at the beginning. But as I went along, when I was writing the research plan and everything, I got to know it. I went on a course of EBCD, and then for the PPI to understand as well what I was doing, I had to train them. And the website for the EBCD, it's very good because it also contains some videos. So every meeting would talk about it so that I could gauge their understanding. And at the end, they did understand what it was about. They also participated in the core design workshops, which is a gray area now, which Sarah alluded to. We'll talk about that later. And they also took part in the advertising of the study at the beginning and assisted in the dissemination of the results. And next slide, please.
Getting there, hold on.
Okay, thank you.
There we go.
Okay, so I had to have a project steering group committee, and in that committee, I've put everyone here, but there were 2 patients that were involved in the group. One patient had not had any history of digital ulcers at all. She was a newly diagnosed patient, and then the other one had a history of digital ulcers. And also I had one representative from the charity organization. Here in UK, we only have one charity organization for scleroderma. So I needed them to be in there for their guidance, because I knew later on I would need them to be involved even after the study, because I didn't want to do a study that would be just for my trust. I wanted it to be something, the outcomes will benefit patients beyond my trust. So that's why I invited them, and they've been instrumental in other things that I am involved in right now, of actually disseminating the work that I have done in the PhD. And I've got projects that I'm actually doing following on from this study. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tani. So there are different types of public involvement that we've seen in the chat, and both Tani and I have touched upon a little bit. One in particular we want to go through is co-production. So as you can see on this ladder of involvement, there are very different stages of how you might involve public members. Obviously from the kind of very, very lower levels of like therapy manipulation, which we don't do in research, to some of those degrees of tokenism. So you can see in there things like consultation, which might take place in certain areas of research. But then one of the aims and kind of where we want to get to is that partnership stage. And this is where things like co-production come in. And there are kind of, in some ways, how I'm now seeing it is that there are two different ways that you can be thinking about co-production. One way is going to be very much as that kind of teamwork, thinking about that NIHR definition that we looked at the very beginning, where you're working with those public members. You're kind of in that research process as equals, you're designing things together, you're looking at the survey questions and all different stages of your research together. There's also very, very specific co-production methods. And this then becomes a little bit more of a research process and part of the research, rather than just having public members being involved in the designing of certain stages of your study or kind of input in feedback and reflecting on the results. So we'll kind of come to an example as well that also addresses whether you need ethics or not. And this is going to be based on whether what you're doing is public involvement and more as a kind of part of the research team versus something like a co-production method, which then becomes a very, very specific stage within your research process where you collect data in a certain way. So co-production methods, if you're writing grant funding applications or publications, will need referencing. You will need to be able to justify why you're choosing that certain method. But it then might mean that you use a very specific series of workshops or a very specific way of working with the public to collect data. So here we can see the kind of definition that we've seen as a way of working that involves people who use health and care services, carers and communities in equal partnership. This engages groups of people at the earliest stages of service design, development, and evaluation. And again, there's kind of several ways that that can be interpreted. So I'm going to pass this over to you again. Oh, it's being a bit slow. Here we go. And I'm going to give you two examples, and I want you to put into the chat which one you think is research and therefore needs ethics, and which one is public involvement and therefore doesn't need ethics. And again, sometimes this is actually more about wording than what you're doing. So Oliver, in your chat, you talked about kind of participation in a coding workshop with PPI members. That in theory could be research, but it could also be public involvement. And this is where I think the distinction will come with the terminology, not necessarily with the activity. So for example, here we've got two activities that could be run, essentially doing the exact same thing, but the wording for it is very different. So in one setting, you might have a PPI meeting. Say you have kind of 6 members there, you discuss a certain stage of the research project, the meeting's recorded to ensure that you've got accurate notes. Those notes still might be kind of maybe put into AI or whatever to I don't know, analyze, write things up, pick out key themes. But this is part of how you're going to progress with your research project. And therefore, if you ever publish this information, that the ideas from the discussion and the meeting, they're not necessarily the main data that you collect, but they will be woven into the publication as part of your methods, and that discussion helped to choose certain methods for your research. And it might also then be part of the discussion where you could say, based on a certain meeting with patients and public members, the following reflections were raised based on the data that was collected. You might then have another scenario where you then run a focus group, which is very similarly recorded, but it's also transcribed and it's analyzed using thematic analysis. The data is then included in a publication as a key outcome of the research project. So you essentially publish the data from the patients who are involved. And one of these is very much, given there's nothing in the chat, I'm going to keep going. So one of these is very much public involvement. So the left-hand side is very much public involvement. You do not need ethics for this or ethical approval for this. However, if you are kind of running an activity in the way that it's laid out on the right-hand side, you will need ethical approval for this because it's written very much in research language. And it could be that you're essentially doing the same activities. So, for example, if you have patients participating in a coding workshop, where that is the main data you're collecting, that then comes under research. If you have some PPI members involved in a coding workshop for supporting the progress of your research, that would be public involvement. Hopefully that helps to clear things up, but I'm then going to pass over to Tani just to give a couple of examples as to how that works in real life. Tani, you're on mute.
Sorry. So I'm just going to quickly talk. So I used, as I've already mentioned, I used experience-based code design. So it put patients at the center of the research, and they are co-designer, they are co-collaborators. So there isn't any power struggles with co-designing or co-producing, in that we are partners, as in equal partners, and they are shared decision making. And so the patients are the experts in their own disease. So they told me, or they told us what they needed. Of course, there was input of healthcare professionals as well, but the voice of the patients were quite strong. And it was a bit intimidating for the healthcare professionals because they are not used to that. But that is what co-designing is about, letting go of the researcher's power and being equal with the patients. Next one, please. The last one. I think, is that the last one? Okay, so I just put here that those that take part in the study, as in they are subject of the study, for example, those I interviewed, are not PPI, they are research participants. Thank you. I'll finish with that.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks so much, Sarah and Tani, for that. That was really great. We do have a question in the chat, a couple of questions in chat, one from Charlotte and one from Rona. So Charlotte asks, would ethical approval be needed if you used EBCD to run co-design workshops to develop a new medical device, but the data would only be used to inform the device design and it would not be published in a paper?
So the way that I see this, within research, we do surveys, focus groups, but people outside of research also do surveys and focus groups, and they don't necessarily get ethical approval for it. I'm going to keep going. So you can definitely use research methods in a non-research setting. There are obviously ethical considerations that need to be made, so it's just kind of keeping that in mind. But assuming that you are not kind of collecting data from it, but you're using that method as a way of working together and kind of hearing that feedback and that kind of co-production on the research team side, you can definitely run these things without it being kind of part of the research process. And assuming that the data isn't necessarily published. Sometimes if you use more research methods, certain journals can get a bit, they might question it. So it's just being really, really clear that if you do run anything evidence-based co-design, for example, that you're really, really clear that this is a method used as part of working as a team, not as part of the research process. But yeah, sometimes it's just in the wording, so it's just being really clear about one way or the other so that people don't question it too much, because otherwise you will get journals and ethics panels and all sorts of teams questioning whether you need ethics or not.
Thanks, Sarah. And we've got a question from Raina about PPI training, if there's any that you know of that's available, ideally stuff that's free to access.
Yeah, so there is going to be a link which I should have on my laptop somewhere, but I just need to find it quickly. So personally, what I find is that training works best on a kind of individual basis with public members. Obviously if you think about it like you're like a PhD, for example, obviously there are more set trainings which can be helpful for you, but a lot of your learning comes by doing and working with people and talking to people. And obviously you can share more formalized training with public members, but I often find that it works best on a bit more of an individual basis. I'll share a link in the chat. This is a collection of different resources from ARC South London. There's lists of tons of different opportunities, training, resources, all sorts of things in here, but they've also organized it based on if the resource or the training is more relevant for public contributors, researchers, or non-researchers. So there's a whole, you'll see the little red dots are the public contributor ones, and there might be something in there that might be really helpful for some of the public members.
Great, and we have one more question from Lewis, which is, in the focus group example, what would the main data output be in the PPIE example, if not an overview of what stakeholders said?
So I think this is actually part of the distinction, that in public involvement, in public involvement where you're part of a research team, there isn't necessarily a main data output. So if you think about how you would work as a research team, or even as like a PhD with several supervisors, when you meet on a regular basis, you don't necessarily have a key output which then gets published, but you have all sorts of conversations that continuously support every single decision you make to guide the way that your research goes. Whereas if you have a focus group to maybe very specifically design the search terms for a systematic review, for example, your output might then be a little bit more clear of like, this is what we want the output to be a list of search terms or something along those lines. I don't know if that kind of answers the question. Tani, I don't know if there's anything else you think you might be able to add as an example.
I think like in a focus group, if you are maybe recording what is being discussed and using that as data, then it's research participants rather than PPI.
Yeah, I guess,
yeah.
Lewis, are you also asking more about if you wanted to do a focus group for PPI purposes? How would you do that? Or are you asking if you...
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So
yeah, it's that distinction between sort of like when is a focus group research and when is it PPI, because essentially you're getting people together and having a conversation with them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think this is where I come back to the terminology, that if you write in that you're having focus groups with PPI members or patients, when you then take your project to an ethics panel or to a journal, they might then question, well, hold on, did you get ethics for this? Because this is a research process and it's something that you're collecting data from and you're using that data as an output that you want to then publish in the journal. If you write it as we're having a workshop or a meeting with exactly the same members, you might have the same questions that you might ask in a focus group as well. If you have a meeting, that meeting would be more about designing and supporting the progression of your research project rather than collecting data, if that makes sense. And then if you word it in the sense of this is a workshop or a meeting, it doesn't raise alarm bells in ethics panels and journals where they then say, where's your ethics for this? Because you're just having a meeting because the PPI members are part of your research team. Is that a bit clearer?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I think we can stay around for 5 or so more minutes. If anyone has any more questions, feel free to put them in the chat, raise your hand. If not, I'm just gonna quickly mention that we've got 2 more winter shorts coming up. So we've got one on research culture next week, and then one on sustainability on health research on the 10th of December. And I'll be emailing everyone after this, so if you want to sign up, you can. And we have some more KCATO events coming up. One before the end of the year on the 10th of December, it's about research and education opportunities in genomics. And then we've got some things in the new year relating to pitching for funding, so giving you some tips on how to do a good funding pitch with Simon Kane, who's really great. We have a webinar for people who are interested in applying for the NIHR Predoctoral Award as well in February. And then we have a session on aiming for independence for researchers who are looking to take that step to become an independent researcher. And yeah, please do reach out, connect to KCATO. We run events like this throughout the year. And thank you so much, Sarah and Tani, for a great session. It's been really helpful. And yeah, I hope you all have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Tani.
Thank you. Thank you.